4 Tenets of World Peace Part 2, Governments Create Their Own Money. Chapter 1. Create our own money, don't borrow it from banks who create it out of thin air. Banks create money out of nothing. 1. Banks create money out of nothing and lend it to governments and people at compound interest. Jesus threw the money changers out of the temple, Matthew 21:12-13. It started in the Bible. From there, the easiest way to understand money is to watch the 10 22-minute episodes of Hidden Secrets of Money at youtube.com/@goldsilver. Goldsilver, W/Mike Maloney. After that, watch Bill Still and Paul Hellyer Money Master videos, which are on YouTube, Rumble and BitChute. The history of money is convoluted until about the 1700s, when bankers in Germany realized that most people brought them gold or silver to hold for storage and got a certificate for it, but rarely came back looking for that hard currency. They figured out how to rip off the people en masse without anybody realizing it. When anybody came looking for a loan, they realized that their account holders rarely came looking for their money, so they started making loans en masse on paper much larger than the amount of money, gold or silver they had on deposit to cover the loan. It was all paperwork controlled by the banker. Everybody had paperwork saying they had money, all created by the mastermind, the banker, who got extremely rich, creating all this money out of nothing, lending it to people as credit, acting like an official authority who risked money to make this loan when he really risked nothing, but the people didn't know that, so they were all beholden to the loans created by the banks on paper out of nothing. He was creating fictitious money out of thin air, lending it out, the borrowers paid back this money at interest. The banker made the principal amount of the loan because he created it out of thin air plus the interest money. This is now called fractional reserve banking, the common way banks do business. They have this unfair advantage in the marketplace, this ability to create money out of nothing every time they make a loan. Nobody figured out it was a massive scam. The first bank that came to be known from championing this form of banking was the Rothschild Bank, officially started in 1811 by Nathan Mayer Rothschild. Since then, his sons expanded it to England, then worldwide. Banks create money out of nothing too. In the United States, both Andrew Jackson and Abraham Lincoln had enough intelligence to realize that they must not give control of the nation's money to bankers. Andrew Jackson, March 15, 1767 to June 8, 1845, fought tooth and nail against the creation of a central bank ruled by private interests. Abraham Lincoln was assassinated on April 14, 1865. Woodrow Wilson, 1856 to 1924, started out as an economics professor, then became the president of Princeton University from 1902 to 1910. It was here that he was surrounded by elitist banker types who convinced him to run for president as their puppet. He got elected. If you read the book Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin, he says that a group of bankers all got together in secret on Jekyll Island in South Carolina, where they hatched a plan to create a private central bank through their puppet Woodrow Wilson. On December 23, 1913, after most of the senators had gone home for Christmas, they held a small in-group back to bring the Federal Reserve Act into existence, which gave control of the nation's money to a group of people in a building called the Federal Reserve Bank. The Federal Reserve Bank is not federal, it's private, nor does it have reserves. It creates money out of nothing and lends it to the U.S. federal government and the commercial banks at compound interest. The U.S. government started demanding income tax soon after this to get its citizens to pay this debt to the Federal Reserve Bank, which it created out of thin air. This is the big scam. It's modern-day slavery and almost nobody is aware of it. This is the basis of modern-day banking. Create loans out of nothing. It's all paperwork and blips on a screen. Banks create money out of nothing. 3. Fractional reserve banking is the commonly accepted way banking is done. Banks risk nothing when they make loans. They create that money out of thin air. It used to be based on a margin of 10, which means that if an individual comes to any bank and deposits $1 million into a savings account, the bank has the right to create loans of up to $10 million based on that $1 million that somebody put into that account, even though the bank doesn't own that $1 million. Banking laws changed, so now the margin rate is undefined. They simply tell the banks to use good sense in doing business. Banks get free money for not doing much but creating paperwork and blips on a computer screen. The passage of the Federal Reserve Act in the United States on December 23, 1913 followed soon after by an income tax law forced all American citizens to pay an income tax to pay for this debt to the Federal Reserve that they created out of nothing. In 1920, right after World War I, the Bank for International Settlements was created to pay war reparations and debts between countries. This Bank for International Settlements quickly rose up as the self-appointed default boss of the world's money supply. It instilled systems in almost every country where governments borrow money from private banks who create it out of nothing, then have to pay this money back at compound interest, so the people of the world are paying income tax to pay debts to banks who created the money out of nothing. We have a worldwide system of privately owned central banks in almost every country except for Iran, Cuba, and North Korea, who create money out of thin air and lend it to their federal government and the commercial banks in their country. They expect this money back at compound interest. They didn't work for this money. They created it out of nothing, put some electronic blips on a computer screen, now want all this money back. The federal governments of all those countries are run by elected politicians, most of whom don't know how money is created. They have allowed this system to go on for at least a century. This is our invisible modern-day slavery that keeps the human race in bondage to these hidden secretive bankers that almost knows about. Get rid of them. It's easy. Do the same thing that John Fitzgerald Kennedy did. He ordered his Department of Treasury to print the money they needed. He was assassinated soon after that, but that's how simple it is to take back the monetary system. Cut the Federal Reserve Bank out. Simply tell them to take a hike. That fake debt, we the citizens as the government have to the Federal Reserve, is wiped out the same way it was brought into existence as paperwork and blips on a screen. Order the Department of Treasury to create a central bank that creates money and gives it to the federal government when and as required to keep a strong economy. The only trick needed is to not print up so much money that its value goes down. Every country in the world can create its own government-owned central bank that gives money to its government to pay for services and economic development. Create money in a prudent, conservative way. If you don't, your currency will end up like Germany's in the 1920s or Zimbabwe's under Mugabe. Tax is slavery. There is no reason for it. The human race can do better than this fake one-dimensional system of governments borrowing money from banks who create it out of nothing, then telling the people they have to pay taxes for the governments to pay its bills. Taxes go against the first rule of economics, which is the multiplier effect. Get money out into the economy so that people spend it and businesses thrive in providing goods and services. Without taxes, we will have more bountiful societies. We don't need to fight in wars if everybody is living a decent life. National governments should not have to borrow money. They are sovereign states. They should create it on their own as the base of their economy. Taxation is robbery of the people by a few elitists who have muddied the waters to convolute the truth such that many people buy into this scam without questioning it. National governments create their own money when and as they need it to run the economy and stimulate it. The trick is to not create so much that the money loses its value. Create enough to constantly stimulate the economy a little bit. The government will have no debt to banks who create money out of thin air. The people will pay no taxes. They will keep all the money they earn. It's that simple. Federal governments create their money through their Department of Treasury when required in order to supply services and stimulate the economy. There is no debt. The government doesn't borrow money anymore. It creates it when and as required to create a great economy. Do not create so much that it loses value through inflation. Create just enough to keep the economy vibrant. The people will not pay income tax. They will be wealthier and happier. This will add a sense of peace and harmony to the world. Banks create money out of nothing for. The banks are the culprit with their fractional reserve banking, creating money out of nothing. That's the dirty trick that has kept them running the world forever, the bankers in the back rooms, and almost nobody knows about it. They're so quiet about it that almost nobody understands how the world really runs. A government has the sovereign right to create its own money, but the money rulers of the world, which are the Bank for International Settlements, the City of London, which is a financial district separate from Greater London, and the Rothschild Bank, have a vested interest in keeping the monetary system of the world a convoluted secret, so that the people don't figure out that the banks create money out of nothing, then lend it to the people and governments, which makes them slaves to bankers who get to create money out of thin air, lend it out and get it back at interest. The bankers created the current monetary system. No group of people or government gave them the authority to do this. Nobody challenged them, so this is what we have, a system where banks create all money out of nothing, lend it to almost all the governments of the world except for Iran, North Korea, and Cuba, and expect this money back with compound interest. They didn't sweat with hard work to create this money. They do some paperwork and put blips on a screen to bring into existence. The people of the world have to pay taxes to their governments so that these governments can pay the debts to these banks. This is a slave system. We're slave to this antiquated monetary system. Nobody has the courage or the strength to take them on and get rid of them. The people have to firstly understand this system, then unite en masse and force it out. If we can get several million people in every country to challenge this monetary system, it will disappear. We had Andrew Jackson, Abraham Lincoln, and John F. Kennedy fighting the central banks, but they all died and the system continues on. Wars create a need for money by governments and companies who ramp up production to make money from the wars. The world's bankers don't care who they lend money to. Wars are profitable to them. They lend money to both sides. At some point, the war ends. They get to collect the debt from the winners and losers in reparations. Bankers want war. They are good for the banking business. If we want world peace, we have to break the banking system run by the private banks. Every country has to exercise its sovereignty by creating its own money, therefore not being beholden to private banks who create it out of nothing and lend it to governments expecting them to pay it back with compound interest, thus rendering most of us as wage slaves because we pay a lot of what we earn in income tax. There should be no income tax. The people and governments should be free to own their own money. If and when we tear down the power of the banks, the potential for wars will go way down because there will not be greedy banksters pushing for them in order to make money. The government in every country should run all the commercial banks. This would take the power away from the private banks, who are the only business in the world allowed to create money out of nothing through fractional reserve banking while everybody else has to sweat for it. This would go a long way to create peaceful human race. Give the people through the government control of the money. Take control of the money away from a central bank owned and run by private bankers. Commercial banks that get to create money out of nothing through a system called fractional reserve banking should be owned by the people through the government, so we don't let a few elitists control the money. If the government of every nation create their own central bank, then create their own commercial chartered banks to put the private banks out of business, the government, therefore the people, would own all the money, so the profit motive of war by private bankers will be gone. This will go far in ending wars, which are manufactured dramas created by rich elitists to expand their power and wealth. The human race will not change until the people take control of the power. I'm not talking BS representative democracies. The next giant step is for the evolution of the human races, that we, the people, take control of ruling ourselves through online creating and voting on the ideas/bills, not having phony representatives who pander to getting votes to get elected, then sell their votes to lobbyists in their council. Until we get the guts to get together to do that, you can't fight the big corrupt elitist machine that runs the world.